In 1898, the United States shattered the Spanish Empire in a matter of months. A swift, decisive victory left America in possession of Spanish colonies across the globe, from Puerto Rico to the Philippines. And right on its doorstep, the prize jewel, the island of Cuba, was finally free from Spanish rule. Everything in the logic of 19th century empire building suggested what should have happened next. The United States, a rising global power, should have annexed Cuba, making it a permanent American territory. It never happened. The question is, why? Why, at the height of its imperial ambition, did the United States fight a war for Cuba, win, and then refuse to take it? The answer is not about charity or goodwill. It's a story of a shrewd political promise, a terrifying military reality, and a calculated decision to achieve all the benefits of an empire without the costs of one. To understand this decision, we have to go back to the very beginning of the war. The American public was whipped into a frenzy by sensationalist newspapers detailing Spanish atrocities against Cuban civilians. The mysterious explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor was the final spark. But even as war fever swept the nation, there was a deep-seated suspicion. Many Americans, particularly in Congress, feared that the war was just a pretext, a land grab orchestrated by sugar barons and imperialists who wanted to turn Cuba into another American colony. They worried that a war for liberation would become a war of conquest. To calm these fears and unify the country for the coming fight, a crucial addition was made to the declaration of war against Spain. It was a single paragraph, proposed by Senator Henry M. Teller of Colorado, and it would change everything. The Teller Amendment was a clear, unambiguous promise to the world, and, more importantly, to the Cuban people. It stated that the political obstacle to annex Cuba outright would be to brand the United States a liar in the eyes of the world. It would prove that the anti-imperialists had been right all along. It was a hypocritical position that would be difficult to defend. The second, and far more serious problem, was the Cubans themselves. The United States did not win the Spanish-American War alone. They had a critical ally on the ground, the Cuban rebels. For years before the Americans arrived, Cuban revolutionaries, the Mambises, had been fighting a brutal, bloody guerrilla war against hundreds of thousands of Spanish troops. They were led by brilliant tacticians like Maximo Gomez and Calixto Garcia. They had been inspired by the writings of their martyred intellectual leader, José Martí. Their goal was singular and non-negotiable, complete and total independence. Cuba Libre. They had not fought and died for years simply to trade one colonial master for another. When the war ended, the Cuban Revolutionary Army controlled the vast majority of the countryside. They were seasoned, determined, and deeply suspicious of American intentions. They had welcomed American help to oust the Spanish, but they were not about to hand their country over to Washington. American military leaders on the ground knew this. They understood that any attempt at direct, permanent annexation would be met with fierce, organized, and violent resistance. The United States had just seen how costly a guerrilla war could be for the Spanish. Did they really want to inherit that same fight? This wasn't just a hypothetical fear. At that very moment, halfway across the world, the United States was getting a horrifying lesson in the cost of colonial conquest. In the Philippines, another former Spanish colony ceded to the US, a brutal insurgency was erupting. Filipino nationalists, who had also fought for independence from Spain, were now fighting the Americans, wanted, without the responsibility and cost of a full-blown colony. This solution was another amendment, the Platt Amendment of 1901. It was a masterpiece of imperial coercion. The United States military had occupied Cuba since the end of the war. They made the Cubans a simple offer: we will not leave until you write our rules into your new constitution. The Cubans, under immense pressure, had no choice but to agree. The Platt Amendment gave the United States the right to intervene in Cuban affairs whenever it deemed necessary to protect life, property, and individual liberty. It dictated Cuban foreign policy, preventing them from making treaties with other countries that might undermine American influence. It forced Cuba to sell or lease land to the United States for naval bases, which is how America acquired the perpetual lease for Guantanamo Bay. In short, the Platt Amendment turned independent Cuba into an American protectorate. It gave the United States effective political and economic control over the island. It secured America's strategic interests. And it did all of this without the need for formal annexation. It was control without cost. So when we ask why the United States didn't annex Cuba, the answer becomes clear. It wasn't a lack of desire. It was a calculated decision based on a confluence of three powerful factors. First, the public promise of the Teller Amendment, which made outright annexation a politically hypocritical act. Second, the very real and very costly threat of a prolonged guerrilla war against a seasoned Cuban independence movement. And third, the shocking concurrent experience of the Philippine insurgency, which laid bare the brutal costs of colonial pacification. Faced with these obstacles, the United States chose not to conquer, but to control. They found a more subtle, more sophisticated way to project power. The Platt Amendment offered them the